right, so this is part two of our introspective. Uh, Welcome back, Mr.
And
Garriott.
great to be with you. Absolutely. I really did think the part one was great fun, and we went on and on for much longer, at least that I had guessed we might have fun chatting, and still ran out of time. So fun to get back together and carry on.
Oh, yeah. And I actually finished your book, Explore, Create My
All
Life
right,
in Pursuit of New Frontiers, Hidden Worlds, and the Creative Spark. Yeah, I had to look at
fantastic,
it.
and
uh,
congratulations for completing it, and now reporting your feat as instructed at the end of the book.
yes, I did report my feat.
Very
And
good.
it is a very engaging book, and we'll get into that. But we got to talk about Ultima 7 because that's where our discussion ended there.
Yep.
We didn't get into much of it, but so Ultima 7 was a landmark game. Obviously, you have a new engine and also you have a new bad guy, which in your book you talk about that, and I'm actually gonna pull up the let me pull up the
A quote.
yeah, you actually you talk about creating the best villain. That's what you wanted to, that right there. Yep.
Yes.
You actually have a copy of that.
Yep. Of course.
So let's talk about the cover first, since you pulled that up. Uh, is that a reference to This Is Spinal Tap?
Actually, no, but this is a reference to 2001's Monolith. And because, the moon gates in Ultima were always these sort of blue shimmering doors.
Right.
And the black gate was the one the Guardian was building and going to utilize. And so this was intended to be a black monolith. And so you cannot imagine how much fighting I had to do to get the cover of the box to be this
Like
black.
it's so featureless.
Yes, exactly. But and in fact, you notice I think on the very first versions there weren't even screenshots on the back. These were put in like a piece of paper that was shrink wrapped into the original box. Was a piece of paper with a few screenshots. But they literally fought me tooth and nail to put screenshots on there, going like, "You have
Right.
to show people what the game is." And I'm going, "No, no, I want the black monolith.
Yes. It's
And
like
can
how
be no
much.
more black."
Yeah, it's like no more black. Yeah, how much black could
That's
it be? But
exactly.
let's actually get into this. So, what made you decide to change the engine for Ultima 7?
Well, actually, every numeraled Ultima has had a new engine. Now, what we did do, as the engines get bigger and bigger and bigger over time, and more expensive and take longer, the motivation to use the engine again for something to make money out of it, because it's just such a big investment, that pressure increased. And so for Ultima 6, we did games like Savage Empire and Martian Dreams, but we determined after Ultima 6 that it was actually, since the game was not written separately as there is an engine and then there's the content, it was kind of written together. It was pretty hard to extract Ultima 6 out of the engine of Ultima 6 and put in Savage Empire and Martian Dreams. And then for Ultima 7, to get a little ahead, we did Ultima 7 Part 2. And that was, again, an attempt at engine reuse where we thought, well, maybe part of the expense of making Savage Empire and Martian Dreams was taking out all the medieval art and fiction. And so maybe if we do a Part 2, which is still within the same graphics data set, then it'll be a more efficient rebuild. As it turns out, that was not true either. So Savage Empire, Martian Dreams, and Serpent Isle all were very well critically received, all sold pretty well, but none of them sold as well as the main numeraled Ultima. And so we attempted to do these sort of spinoffs. They didn't actually save any money in development, and they didn't sell as well as the original. And so that was kind of an attempted run at efficiency that didn't end up being very efficient.
So, like with Ultima 7, you also had to come up with a new villain.
Well, and specifically, as you know from reading the book, Ultima's 1, 2, and 3, and even a Calibeth before that, were they were sort of classic
Yeah.
fantasy stories where there's a big bad guy who's waiting for you at the final level
Yeah.
and really isn't doing anything particularly evil other than wait for you.
Right.
And you, the player, are actually perpetrating a lot of evil. You're stealing and pillaging and killing off all the NPCs in order to becam powerful enough to kill the bad
Yeah,
guy
and stealing
who's done nothing bad.
princesses, and
Yeah,
stealing
and
princesses and stealing time machines.
well, perhaps a little of that, but you don't see them actively doing it. They're not doing it during the game. That's the setup. You're
Right.
told they did it, but you don't see them do it. And so with 4, 5, and 6, as you know, those were stories about introspection and virtue and kind of really reflecting on yourself. And so I didn't have a major true evil bad guy
Right.
until Ultima 7.
Yeah, because the Blackthorn wasn't a villain.
Correct. He was just badly misguided.
Yeah. So, how did you come up with the idea for the Guardian?
Well, so I sat down and I said, okay, if I'm going to make something that's actually evil, I sat down to think, what is the logic, of evil, and how can it be self-sustaining and not self-destructive? I mean, I think there's real challenges to actual evil and how it can be, consistent at the very least. That's a bit of a challenge, and but I also wanted it to be active, meaning you're not just told they stole a time machine, you're not just told they captured a princess, but rather you would see them in action in the game while you were in the game to earn their worthiness of being called evil. And so I wanted to make sure that, for example, if you were going around evangelizing for virtue and looking for people to help you stop the Guardian, the Guardian, of course, is also kind of going around trying to convince people that he's the right guy for the future,
Right.
and you're not as good a person as you seem, and there also needed to be risk to people to help you. So if, for example, you might find a beggar or a thief that you can say, oh no, you don't follow the Guardian. You really need to start on the path of virtue. To the degree you were successful at maybe converting, a not so nice person to being on more of the path of virtue. If the Guardian ever found out about that, he would murder that person. And so I wanted to make the actions you did an actual risk for the people who helped you. And so that would give people in the game caution, authentic caution as to why they might want to help you, and give the Guardian a direct response to your actions to make you have to really sit down and think about, wow, I'm endangering people
Right.
by trying to be helpful. And so you'd have to be much more careful about the way you went about that. So anyway, I was trying to create a complex bad guy that wasn't just a mindless killing machine in the story, but actually had action in the game.
Well, in your book, you say that the true purpose of the Fellowship was to create the gateway that allowed an evil entity called the Guardian to get inside Britannia and eventually gain control. So how did the idea of the Fellowship come about?
Oh, so
And
that came
Batlin.
about. Yeah. So I think there's probably a little coin in here. Look at there. I just opened the box. The thing right on top of the box is this little trinket, the little coin for unity, trust, and worthiness. And so what I try to do is, as I look around the world personally, and I see a lot of the cults, for lack of a better word, that good people have fallen into. One of the I think is most interesting about world history is that even some of the most truly evil periods of history, like let's use Nazi Germany as a common place to kick around.
Right.
Most of the people who lived in Germany obviously weren't evil.
No.
Most of the people that joined the German army probably weren't evil. Even a lot of the people who did despicable things, there's been modern research to show, for example, that almost anyone is willing to torture a prisoner if given the right either idea or direction or permission from an authority figure. And so good people can do bad things if leadership is corrupt. And by the way, I think that resonates even today. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to do with the Fellowship is I said, look, I want to come up with a virtue system that I'm immediately going to corrupt. And so I specifically was looking for what kind of triad of like truth, love, and courage is the one I push as good. How can I invent another one that sounds nice on the surface, but I can very quickly show you a twist to where this can be used to dominate people and convince good people to do bad things. And so what I came up with was this. It was unity, trust, and worthiness. And they were written like those three for a specific purpose. So first with unity. Unity was, a lot of people feel like society was fragmented or no one's here to help me. And unity was, wouldn't it all be great if we supported each other and worked together?
Right.
And so a unity of community, that's obviously a good thing to be, to work to help uplift your own community. Great. But pretty quickly I could say unity also could mean you're either one of us, you're part of our community,
right,
or you're one of them. You know what I mean? And so
us
it's
against
us
them.
or them.
Yeah.
And so by just taking it a couple steps too far, it can be perverted. And then I said trust. The good part of it is you should work to try to earn the trust of others within the community with which you feel unity. You want to make sure that you're an honest person, that you tell the truth, that you deal with each other fairly, that sort of thing.
Right.
So earning trust is important. And so first of all, that makes you try to earn the trust of the superiors as well as each other. And it also means the superiors can turn to you and go, when I tell you to go march in that field and shoot whatever comes over that hill, and you don't ask why, just trust me. We've earned each other's trust. I wouldn't lead you wrong. Just take it on faith that I'm telling you what to do, and that is right. And then the third one was worthiness, which was the good side is you always want to, pull your part of contribute your part to the common good. In other words, if a tower needed to be built or a field needed to be plowed, then one way to prove that you were worthy of sharing the bounty of what came out of that was that you helped work to create it. So you want to prove that you are worthy. And then again, the way that can be twisted is to say, when I tell you to shoot that gun and at the head of whatever head sticks up, shoot it.
Right.
And not only should you just trust me that person's, I'm telling you that's a bad guy that needs to be eliminated. Yeah. But also, you need to do it to prove that you are worthy of remaining within our community. And so this little triad, started as hey, we're all in this together and let's support each other. But could just with a couple of extra steps could be, I'm the boss, do what I say, and if you're not worthy, we're gonna expel you, and likely you're the enemy.
And that is so complex, though, because in most first-person shooter games, like when you see a bad guy, you shoot them. That's right. the whole right. concept of that. But in this game, actions have consequences.
Yes, and even to think about it, I have no idea where your politics lie, and it's not important. I mean, I'm sure we have listeners who are on all of all political leanings, but
right.
but I would hope that any of them would agree that without regard to their personal, which side of any particular line, any particular debate they fall on, that the issues are complicated, right? If you look at the people protesting right now, I would argue that there is cause for a lot of people to be protesting.
Right.
Also, though, a lot of protesters are crossing dangerous lines and causing damage or harm and hurt. And of course, that's clearly not a good thing.
No.
And so you go like, well, what do you do to stop it? What do you do to reconcile this? And then I believe the correct answer is very complicated. That it is incorrect to utterly vilify anyone involved in these complex debates. And the only thing that you can do about it is try to settle it down and keep everyone safe.
Yeah, settle.
Then find a way to open dialogue and realize that almost any of their good ideas, the good ideas on any side, can easily be corrupted.
Right.
And that's what we need to watch out for.
And you still need to establish order as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because without some form of peace, the dialogue can't continue.
Right. So where does Batlin fall into all this?
Well, I think Batlin, was truly corrupted.
Yep.
Meaning he is a he was not merely duped. And I'll use that in the following way. Going back to our Nazi Germany example, I think a soldier in the German army that was fighting for what he or she thought was defending their country, can, in some sense of the word, be forgiven for participating. On the other hand, there were clearly, if you look, for example, let's use a movie, Schindler's List.
I love that movie.
Me too. You look at the guy that would be happy to sit on the hillside and take a gun and shoot people in the concentration camp, because in his mind they were all going to die anyway, and he was just part of the machine. But he was well aware of the evil that he was perpetrating. You know what I mean? So he was fully corrupt. So Batlin, in my mind, was fully corrupt. He was somebody who recognized that these were actively being perverted, that could see that as a way to rise to power, and thought I can ride into power with this with this regime, and hanging my hat here will gain me more personally than fighting a good fight.
Right. And the thing is, with Ultima 7, like, Lord British, he is, like, falling for this. Like, he's, like, telling you should, join the Fellowship. And yet people were like, why are you questioning the Fellowship? You're the Avatar. So,
right, and again, that goes back to the Ultima 6 story we talked about before, where I'm really trying to set up the player, right? I'm trying to show that reasonable people, including Lord British, can make bad calls. Cannot foresee. Again, and it's like the followers of Jim Jones that all gave him all their money and went down to South America and eventually drank poison Kool-Aid. The majority of those people, prior to dying, invested in someone for reasons that they thought were pure and virtuous. And so a silver-tongued devil can make a pretty persuasive argument around how to take a potentially good idea and use it for personal gain.
And the thing that I love the most about Ultima 7 is the fact that you don't just go in and be like, oh, I'm just gonna go after Batlin, and you have to actually piece together stuff like like a detective story, sort of.
Right.
Like that's sort of what it falls under the line of. Like, what was your idea to just guide the player through the story and let them figure it out themselves, like a detective?
Yes, I mean, the word guide is interesting to use because if you think about the way most stories are told in games, one of the challenges of an interactive game, unlike, say, a book is a linear narrative defined by the author. A game usually often wants to tell a narrative, but you want to give at least the illusion of as much choice as possible, as much as you can. But the problem is that if you think about the reality of the world, that we live in, on any one day, either one of us could decide to give up our current job and go live on an island in Bermuda or something, And so we could literally ignore the entire future hypothetical plot for our own lives and go do something completely different. And the problem with the game is that if people do that, you won't have written any code, or art to support this other activity. And so you're always having to shepherd people back into the mainstream. And so a lot of games sort of feel like instead of a single thread, it's a kind of wider path, but you still are pinging around in between these two side rails. Right. The way I try to do it, and the way I've tried to do it with all Ultimas, is I actually tried to say, I'm going to build out an entire world. I'm going to put the clues all over the world, and I'm going to let you solve pieces of the puzzle separately. And so if one clue you might need, using a detective story analogy, is, the fingerprint, there's one thread to go find the fingerprint, and it'll wander through the world, eventually end up over there. And I'm going to give plenty of clues to get you back on the right path for the fingerprint. Right. But that is completely independent of there's another path to find, the murder weapon. And the
Right.
path to find the murder weapon starts in a completely different place, ends in a completely different place, meanders on its own. And if you get stuck on the find the murder weapon story, there are not only clues to help you restart that and get back on track, but there's also clues that, the fingerprint's useful too, and here's where you start. And so what I do is I set up each of those I set up each as many separate threads as possible that occasionally have to come back together. Like, okay, now I've proven, I've got enough evidence to prove that Batlin's actually a bad guy. Okay, well,
Right.
now what do you do about it? So now the second phase is, how do I stop Batlin? The third piece might be, okay, now what do we do at the Black Gate? And so I have these sort of major beats of, is the Fellowship good or bad? What do we do about Batlin? How do we destroy the Black Gate? And then within each of those major beats that sort of do have to be solved concurrently, the threads that make up that beat are as independent as possible to give you as much of the feeling of freedom as possible.
And that's the key word right there, freedom.
Freedom. Exactly.
Yep. You could pretty much do anything you want in the game.
That's right. At any time. Yeah.
At any time. And then you decided to go ahead and do a part 2 of this because,
And again, that was because it was extremely long to develop.
Yeah.
It was extremely expensive, and we thought, the time between 2 major New World Ultimas was so long that we wanted to do something in between. We wanted to use the engine, and we wanted to have a release in the middle. And so that's why we did Savage Empire, Martian Dreams, and that's why we did Ultima 7 Part 2.
Yep, the Serpent's Isle, which is perhaps one of the best,
Yeah, and by the way, I think from a fictional standpoint,
from a fictional standpoint, yep,
it may be the best. But what's also interesting about that is to understand kind of the strengths and weaknesses of various team members. Right. And so, Warren Spector as the producer and the primary writer, Stephen Beeman, they worked with me in Ultima 7 Part 1. But during Part 1, we, of course, were also building the engine, doing other kinds of things. And so I was clearly the boss, shall we say. I set up the guardrails, and, you have to fit exactly in here. After that, those guys split off to do Ultima 7 Part 2, largely on their own. I mean, I was watching over the shoulder, but I was already working on Ultima 8. And so that team had the luxury and opportunity to sort of do something with a stable engine, so they didn't have to worry about that. They weren't the technology part of the team. They already moved on. But they literally had the freedom to really focus on fiction, and I think they did just a marvelous job.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a very complicated thing, but in the long run, like it basically benefited you guys to continue the story because we got more out of it. Like,
right,
it's basically like the early days of DLC. Like, with DLC, they usually extend the story or, have a different ending or something along those lines. Like, would you agree that this was like, testing those type of waters?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. And in fact, we began to do, that's about the time where Origin began to do, there was no online to download, but it would be a disc to do this digital added on content. And but we began to do things like music discs and voice discs and additional scenario discs. And so so it was like DLC but on a floppy.
Speaking of voices, you were actually a voice in the game.
Yes, in the dungeon, if I remember.
Yep.
Yeah. And so no, it's really me. It's Lord British.
Yeah. We'll get into Ultima 9, but I believe you did a lot of voices in your Ultima games.
Well, I think everybody.
Sounds like you.
Yeah, everybody on the team got involved usually, but it was interesting. There was sort of this middle time when when you first could begin to put in a little bit of voice, but the games weren't big enough monetarily yet to justify sending a crew to Los Angeles to a recording studio to hire major actors to do the vocals. And so for a while, we just, since we had a recording studio to make some music in, you just set up a microphone and send a parade of employees through to, get the right gender and accents for various characters. So everybody jumped in, and but then, over time, as the budgets got bigger and the quality demands became greater, we began to use more and more professional grade voiceovers. But as Lord British, I still would jump in there occasionally myself.
Right. So before we get into Ultima 8, I think we need to talk about this, about EA.
Oh yeah.
So you guys took a lot of cheap shots at EA in Ultima 7. You mocked them for stealing an asset from one of your games.
Oh yes.
Like, could you go into that?
Yeah, well, it's more than a little bit of. I wouldn't call them just cheap shots. I'd say they were like big shots.
Big
In
shots.
fact, it was ironic. Well, a little of the backstory has to be told, which is
Right.
Origin and Electronic Arts started almost the same month. In fact, as we were starting Origin, Trip Hawkins, who was the president of EA, came to us and tried to convince us not to open Origin and instead join forces with EA. So. And Origin always did very well. I was never unhappy with the growth of Origin. But EA had a very, very different track. EA, we funded ourselves with the success of our previous games, so we grew slowly but steadily. EA took venture capital money, and they immediately went on acquisition bends. They started buying other companies almost immediately. And so they grew much faster than we did. In fact, in some ways, that's a better strategy. At least if your goal is money, that had proved to be a superior strategy.
Right. And they had the money.
And they had the money because they had the VC backing to begin with, and they just started buying up stuff left and right, and that worked out very well for them. Interestingly, throughout our career, Origin was always one of the top 10, but usually about 10 companies in the country, if not the world. And over time, it actually became harder and harder to remain independent, even as big as we were. And the reason why was that shelf space at stores like Best Buys or CompUSA's or whatever the stores were back at the time, and even eventually at Walmart, Walmart doesn't want to buy games from 100 different companies. They don't even know who the 100 companies are.
Right.
They just want to call one or two big distributors, fill their shelves, and be done with it. Right. And they also want to make sure that if they put a game on their shelf that doesn't really sell very well, they want to be able to give that game back to the publisher and get a different game to put on the shelf at no cost.
Times were different.
Yeah. And so, when we were only producing 1 or 2 or 3 titles per year, stores wouldn't even talk to us, a lot of stores, and even if they would talk to us, they would be uncomfortable with carrying our product because if we did send them something that didn't sell, we wouldn't have another release coming out for so many months that they would have a bunch of dead inventory and money on the shelf. So they just wouldn't carry our stuff. And so we began to have to distribute alongside even bigger companies. And so one of the first ones we distributed with was Electronic Arts. And at first, that seemed to go very well. But the story you were telling about the lifting of assets is that, by the way, this was in kind of the middle Ultima period. And it wasn't uncommon to go to certain places like in Asia, in Japan and such, where we would find people that literally stolen, Ultima code, Ultima art, and made games out of it.
Yeah.
And some part of me as an artist, bootleg stuff. But some part of me goes, these are often young people building their own games, using my game as their inspiration, and then somebody tells them, that's really cool, you ought to publish it, kind of like somebody told me when I was a kid. And so I don't necessarily blame the author of those products. But what happened in the case of EA was there was a game that had been submitted first to Broderbund, and someone at the Broderbund test department said, well, this is so close to Ultima, we really ought to ask Richard if this is okay to publish.
Right.
And so they sent it to me, and I said, wow, I'd love to tell you yes, but this person has literally stolen, the random green dot pattern for grass is my random green dot pattern for grass. Same thing with characters and everything else. And even the commands like A mid attack, B mid board a vessel, C mid cast a spell, all those were the same. So the story was different, but tons of the interface, tons of the art was just lifted straight out of Ultima.
And this ain't like with Doom where id Software actually gave people the Doom engine and everything. No. They just stole assets from you.
Absolutely. And so I told Broderbund, that was actually too close, that there would be a bunch of stuff you'd have to change if you wanted to publish it, or else we would have a legal problem with it. And Broderbund said, no, we get it. We're not going to publish it. And so I thought that was over. But then a couple months later, the person submitted the game to Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts announced that they were going to publish it. And so I went to EA, and we had a meeting at the Consumer Electronics Show with Trip Hawkins, where I had made printouts of like my green dot pattern for grass and their green dot pattern for grass, and we could hold up these pieces of paper at the window of the hotel room in Las Vegas, and I could show you that the pixel art was identical. And so first we go in the hotel room, and Trip Hawkins goes, "How dare you tell me, Electronic Arts, that I can't publish other fantasy role-playing games?" And I'm going, no, Trip, you don't get it. I'm not telling you can't publish other fantasy role-playing games. You already do. Bard's Tale and other things you already published, and I'm perfectly cool with that. Good. And it is good. But I said, no, this one is legally infringing. It's a rip-off of my game that you publish, that you distribute for us, so you can't do that. And he looked at the art and he goes, well, maybe we need to change a couple things, but we are going to publish this game. And so they went and they actually changed all the stuff that was legally infringing, and they published the game, and no one ever noticed or cared because it wasn't really that good a game. But we use that to say, like, these guys are not on our side. So we actually left distribution with Electronic Arts, and then EA turned around and sued us. And we were like, over what?
Yeah,
like, over
what? You for what?
And we ended up just to close down this basically slap suit. We had to settle out of court, and so it really hurt our company to go through this journey, with Trip Hawkins, and so while we were working on Ultima 7, EA and Trip Hawkins became major points of bad guys and harassment.
Right.
So Trip Hawkins spelled backwards is Pert Snickwa. So Pert Snickwa is the most nefarious pirate to ever sail the seven seas. As you may remember in Ultima 7, in addition to the monolithic black gate, the three the points of evil power are the black sphere, the black cube, and the black tetrahedron, which are not only primary polynomials, but they also happen to be the EA logo.
Yep.
And so that's in here too. Yep. And then there's a whole bunch of other characters that are basically named E and A. Somebody in anyway, two of the main bad guys under Batlin, their first Elizabeth and Abraham. That's EA. And so there's all this stuff. But the irony is that our problem after leaving EA remained the same, right? We still had to be part of a bigger publisher in order to get shelf space. And so we struggled independently for a while. We distributed through other companies for a while, but eventually we decided, we really have to permanently join forces with somebody.
Right.
And by that point in time, Trip Hawkins had left EA. And it was my feeling that the primary reason for our disgruntlement with EA was not the company per se, but it was really Trip Hawkins. And so we said, well, we ought to at least talk to him again. So we did. And knowing that we had this complex history, we actually went to them and said, hey, by the way, we're thinking about joining forces with you, but you have to understand, I've almost finished Ultima 7. And Ultima 7 is sort of an ode against EA in some pretty non-subtle ways. And Larry Probst, who was the CEO of EA at the time, I kind of went through the litany of the ones, and he thought they were hilarious. He actually thought those are just good fun, and it's ripping EA for something they probably deserved.
Right.
And it really is done in a tongue-in-cheek, metaphoric way.
Right.
And tons of other people called EA the Evil Empire already by then too. So, so they were happy to not only onboard us, but happy for me to continue to publish this. Despite the long list of EA bashing that was in it.
Right. And I think a lot of people, they give EA too much flack. But, some of it's deserving. Yep. But, at least you guys found a way to, be creative with it.
Yeah, and by the way, I think EA deserves some of it too. But
yeah.
They deserve it because they're just a big corporation, and big corporations do things that are in the interest of the big corporation, not necessarily their employees, their authors, or the players.
So, what made you decide to just flat out join them?
Well, we had to join someone. We literally would have had no choice. We had no ability to sell product,
right,
if we weren't part of either EA or we debated on putting a consortium together with ourselves and Broderbund and 2 or 3 other companies that were about this number 10 size company to where combined we'd be a number 1. But that turned out, and that probably, in hindsight, that may, had that been able to work out, that might have been more rosy for the future. But that was really complicated, and so we weren't able to make something like that work out.
Right.
And so in the end, the path with EA really did come out on top as the best choice for us, and so we did.
Right. And I mean, honestly, you had to do something, and
there was no choice. There are tons of people that are going like, "Hey, why didn't you stay independent?" We couldn't have. We would have gone out of business. It would not have worked to stay independent.
Yeah. It's not like now you can basically get your game published by anyone and stay independent.
Yeah, but even now, I would say the budgets are so large. If you want, we're in a hit-based industry. You either make the top 10 and you can make a ton of money, or you're not in the top 10 and you probably aren't earning back the money you spent on the game. And so when that is any art, think about this in the since you just read the book, let's talk about books. Books, paintings, movies. All these things are art,
right?
And unlike the stock market for businesses that make concrete or buildings or sheets of paper, when it makes a lot of money to make paper, more people get into making paper because it's a good business,
right?
But the more people that get in, the less profitable it is, right? And if paper suddenly becomes a pretty bad business to be in, somebody's going to leave the business. They're going to go out of business or choose to leave the business. And that leaves a bigger pie for the people who stay behind. And so most businesses are efficient in the sense of the more the demand is, the more people will do it. The less the demand is, the less people do it.
Right.
Art is not that way.
No.
Art people do out of passion, personal passion. They just feel compelled to paint or write. But if you look at most art, if I took you to a random art gallery in New York and said, "Would you like to put this on your wall at your home?" I'll bet most people to most art would say, "No, that's not me."
Well, I would.
You would if at a random one. Okay, so maybe you would, but
it depends on the artist.
That's what I mean. It depends on the artist, and so I would actually say that the majority of art that is made is not good art in the eyes of most other people. You have to find the right person. And there's some art, though, that's great to a large number of people.
Right.
And that's the top 10 artists, or the top 10%, kind of scenario.
Yeah, my art teacher always told me, though, that, art is subjective. What one person might say about your art, like, it may be bad, but to another person, it's good.
Oh, and in fact, I totally agree with that. And that's also why, despite so many companies leaning on things like focus groups, I hate them. I don't believe them at all, because I look at my best-selling work over time, Ultima 4, Ultima 7, and Ultima Online. Those were all pieces of work that everyone around me, every focus group, all my peers, said was a bad idea. I mean, I could not get support. In fact, I got the opposite for the things that turned out to be my best ideas based upon my own pride of the eventual product and the public reception of that eventual product. And so I am, if you're an artist, you want to hear people's feedback to see if they might go like, "Hey, this brushstroke's out of place." And you go, "Oh yeah, it is. I'll fix that." But you don't let them drive what you do, right? To some degree, if you believe in what you're doing, then no, keep going. You know what I mean? Just do your art the best you believe in. And it may or may not find a big audience, but again, you have to decide, why are you doing it? Are you, if you're doing it to find an audience, it's hard to think of, or at least I don't know a path by which you can focus group your way into great art. Focus groups bring you down to the mediocrity of the lowest common denominator, where you're not offending anybody. I actually think great art makes you uncomfortable. Great art is something that almost holds a mirror up to yourself, like a black mirror in the case of the series. It sort of says, it showcases to you, things that are complicated, things that you might feel one way about, but try to let you see it from another person's perspective, to where you can go like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be so quick to judge, or whatever it might be.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. But like, what do you usually tell people that don't like your stuff? Like, how do you take the criticism from all
Well,
that?
it depends on the nature of the criticism.
Right.
So, um, it depends how, if how fair I think the criticism is.
Well, how did young Richard take it?
Well, so first, so again, about the time of Ultima 4, the first real criticism I got was from people that were perceived as pretty powerful, TV evangelists and such who were calling me and my work evil, and even
Yeah.
extended family members who were calling my work evil. And so that really did cause me to sit back and go like, wow, I don't think I'm doing anything evil.
You talk about that in
Why
your
is it
book, by the way.
yeah, why is it that they're saying this? And so as I began to unpack why they were saying this, um, that's when I kind of came to the realization of, nope, they're like Batlin. They are people who have corrupted these
And they have.
good things. The majority of people who are their followers are really good people trying to do good for themselves and good in the world. But these individual people are using it for personal empowerment.
Yep.
And one of the ways they enrich themselves and gain power is by creating others, creating enemies. And so powerful people who objectify and create enemies out of people, I think are pretty much universally what I would describe as evil in the modern sense of the word.
Right.
And so that's sort of, but then so that sort of started me on this path. But there's other times where I just think people are, sometimes being like correct criticism, like technology wasn't up to snuff, or didn't necessarily look right, or we focused on the thing. But the other ones that I take, I reflect on perhaps in a way that differently than others would, is when things make people uncomfortable. And so, for example, we'll get to Ultima 8 here in a minute, but the symbols. If you think about, if you think of scary movies universally use the 7 deadly sins for bad guys in witchcraft, and they also universally use pentagrams for bad guys in witchcraft. But as soon as I started doing that in a game, it was interesting to see how many buttons that pushed with people. And so when that happened, I sit back and I explore on my own and talking with them, why does this make you uncomfortable? And even though a lot of times those people were saying, I'm so uncomfortable, I won't support you or this game if these things stay in it, I would commonly still conclude the game needs it in it.
Right.
Because I think you're wrong to believe that, first of all, we're doing anything wrong. I think there's nothing wrong with what we're doing.
Right.
And I kind of want to push people into a place that feels a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to make them offended. I don't want them to walk away, because that's kind of shooting yourself in the foot. But the fact that, if I have one person who's going to walk away, that probably means there's 10 more people who will be made uncomfortable enough to kind of reflect on, why is this making them uncomfortable? An emotional reaction.
And not
just an emotion of sadness, but an emotion of
like fear.
Fear or of self-reflection of, what am I doing wrong?
Right. So now we're gonna get into Ultima 8 now, but so how was the process of this? Like you said, you worked on this while Ultima 7 Part 2 was out, and I'm pretty sure you had a lot of pressure from EA to get this game out, because there's a lot of things with Ultima 8. The story was unfinished. Some of the quests were unfinished. The platforming, which you guys did manage to patch that up, but just go into it.
So let me jump in. So Ultima 8 is one of the games where I actually feel that had we finished it as planned, I think it would have been a great Ultima.
Oh yeah.
However, it is probably the most commonly maligned Ultima, and ultimately I have to blame myself, because I allowed this. But let me give you my excuse. as to why it went so far off the trails. Now, we've already had plenty of time to go into how we were trying to reuse the engines of Ultima 6 and Ultima 7 to make sure the cost versus sales was properly balanced. And this is at a time where other people were doing things like you already mentioned, where John Carmack was taking his engines out of his id products and separating them from the game so that he could reuse the engine literally separately. And Unreal was beginning to do the same thing. And but we had not done that yet with Ultima. And so Ultima was still in this. It costs a lot of money and takes a long time between releases. And now we were part of EA. And EA, when we sat down and go, like, what are we going to do with not just Ultima 8, but Ultima engines and other things going forward, the story that they told, their position was the following. They said, look how we do. We know you're not doing a sports game, but look what we do with, say, Madden football. We have a football engine, a football engine that is constantly being improved. And what we do at the beginning of each football season, enough time before the beginning of each football season, we fork the engine off, package it up, and we produce one for this year. And the engine just keeps going. And that way, for 21, we have a better engine. For 22, we have a better engine. But the result of that is that we release at the beginning of every football season. It means we're never out of the public eye. They always think about this particular brand. The brand is always getting better. And the brand is always better than other football games because we put a lot more money into this than anybody else can because we're on this regular cadence and we're continuing to be this top seller. And so they would pull out lots of data to me to go, Richard, I know you want to take 3 years to make Ultima 8, but we're telling you that we have data to show that your total market will be better served by figuring out a way to get it into this, half that kind of period of time.
Right.
And so I was like, well, you guys have a lot of success, even better than me. So and you employ me now. So who am I to not listen at all? Let's see what we can do. And so, we started with these big plans for Ultima 8. We began to build them. We saw how far out it would be, and we're going like, oh boy, that's going to be, far beyond what he is hoping for. We got feedback that was far beyond what they were hoping for.
One thing I will say, though, about Ultima 8, I don't mean to interrupt you. It has a really awesome cover art. That is badass.
There's a couple of variations of that cover art. The first one has the full flaming pentagram on it. And later ones have the pentagram removed, and that goes back to this thing that I was just talking with you about the pentagram,
right?
And the fact in this case, stores like Walmart and Target wouldn't sell the game because of the pentagram on the cover. They would not let us put it on the store shelf because they worried about Satanists, and that sort of thing. And it would be okay if it was on a movie. Oh my gosh! It'd be fine on a movie. If there was a Seven Deadly Sins with exactly. If there's pentagram on movies, it's fine. But you put it on a game, no, no longer okay. Okay, but
I wonder if they do it now.
I don't know if they do it now. That's a good question. Well, I'll try it with the next game.
Yes.
So with Ultima 8, the first thing I tried to do was just reduce the scope of the whole game. And the sadness for me, and I don't have an Ultima 8 map around here, but the volcanic island.
It has an awesome map.
But the map, slowly as we evolved the game, became less and less real to the game. One of the things I'm proud of in every other Ultima map is the map is completely accurate to the game. And you actually need it to play the game. But for Ultima 8, those two things diverged. For Ultima 8, tons of other things diverged. You mentioned the platforming. This was before Diablo, which is sort of a run-jump role-playing game. This would have been Diablo plus Ultima had we finished it correctly.
Right.
And as you mentioned the patch, when we first put the jump in, the jump always translated you forward a fixed amount. We'll call it a meter.
Right.
And since it always went forward a fixed amount, that means if you're trying to jump from one pole onto another pole or island onto an island, you could overjump it or underjump it, but you'd have to back up to this distance that was properly 1 meter away from the target, or else you wouldn't be able to reach it.
Oh yeah.
And so, the fix was easy. All we had to do is make it targeted. So when you said jump here, it jumped to that exact spot. And so the fix was easy. We just didn't have time to do it. And so Yeah, so Ultima 8 sadly was hacked into pieces. At least half the story was basically thrown away. Half the map was thrown away. Tons of the features were only half implemented and never really refined well.
Right.
But it shipped on time.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
it shipped on time, much to my horror. That guess what? EA's advice was wrong. It was bad advice.
Right. But let's get into a little bit of the story though of Ultima 8
Yeah.
because I mean, like it like with Serpent's Isle, at the end of Serpent's Isle, you basically restore balance and you bring the serpents together. Why didn't they help the Avatar when the Guardian is like, I got to get my revenge on you. I'm gonna send you to another world that I've already taken over.
It was lack of foresight.
It's like,
Okay.
sorry, Avatar, cannot help you.
Can't help you now. Oh, now you're in need. Oh, sorry, I'm busy. Yeah.
I'm busy restoring balance and stuff.
Yes, exactly. Keeping the balance, keeping the
Right.
scales.
So with Pagan, like this was a different world, and they had no idea who the Avatar was.
Correct.
So
And more
yeah.
and more specifically, what I was trying to set up was, we all have grown up wherever you've grown up. You've grown up in the environment you now consider familiar, in the culture you now consider familiar, with the standard rules of engagement with which we are now familiar. And so pretty much all of us in America would agree that murder is bad.
Yes.
And stealing is probably bad too. And but there's even more than that. I mean, we agree to drive on the right-hand side of the road. We agree to have a handshake is generally a greeting.
Yeah.
And and if you look at I'll use Star Trek. Klingons have another a fictional formal
Right.
society that is based on different principles, right? Might and pride and dominance and whatever else. And so I said, well, what would you do? You try to think of a place that you're going like, wow, I just would not fit in there, and I really just don't agree with them.
Right.
But there's a large population of it. Let's use terrorists as an example, right?
Right.
If I took literally you, but I disguised you in a way that you didn't appear to be a foreigner and you could speak the language, and I literally embedded you in a terrorist camp that was doing terrorist activities, what would you do about it? Now, don't forget, they're children. The children who grew up in those terrorist activities.
I probably wouldn't be comfortable with that.
Right, but the question is what would you do to survive, right? So if you were there, even watching young children grow up to believe in these jihadist ideals, if you expose yourself as being not a jihadist, then you would be beheaded, potentially. On the other hand, you probably don't really want to shoot people like they're sending their squads out to go do. But if you don't, they might again find out and cut your head off. What do you do? And again, similarly, talk about occupied France. So, what do you do when you find yourself in a place where people literally believe things, and power is actually gained by doing these things that are so antithetical to you, and there's no one around to help you. There's no friends. Like again, maybe
no
occupied France. No companion, all that stuff. They're all gone. And so that's what I try to set up. And so I try to set up this world of Pagan, where it's based on the earth, air, fire, water, and spirit magic. I was actually really proud of. I really loved those 5 types of magic, and the kinds of spells that worked out, including some of the rituals that went into it. I really loved the ritual magic.
A lot of people would make a Final Fantasy joke there, because
I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, with Final Fantasy, the story with Earth, Wind, Fire, you have to go and gather the elements.
See, but I have to confess, I've not actually played most of my competitors' fantasy games because I've been busy.
I know, but like a lot of people would joke about that. But go on.
But so in any case, I wanted to make sure I set up this world where the only way you would survive is to participate at some level, and I knew that would make people uncomfortable. I knew that just the symbol of the pentagram would make people uncomfortable. I knew that voluntarily participating in things that were morally suspect after writing 4 games in a row about
Right.
morals. I knew that would make people feel uncomfortable.
Right, and
So
it certainly did. I
yeah,
mean, my mom was uncomfortable buying it.
right,
'Cause-
and that was sort of the point. But I actually think that if I'd managed to finish it as planned, it would be up there in the pantheon.
Right. Oh yeah, it
So,
definitely would have.
yeah.
And now, before we get into Ultima Online, which is your greatest creation, uh, I do want to talk about the Underworld games a little bit because nobody ever talks about them.
Yeah, and so that was so Paul Neurath deserves the great credit really for Ultima Underworld, and how that came about,
which is a precursor to Elder Scrolls, by the way.
Yeah, and but if you look at the very earliest Ultimas, as we've been talking, the earliest Ultimas had Ultima 1 had space flight, 2D towns, tile graphic outdoors, 3D dungeons. They had all these different technologies for different environments. And the problem with that is that you have to rewrite the functions for each environment. So, for example, if you want to cast a spiderweb spell, if it's in a dungeon corridor, you presumptively mean to fill the corridor with the web. If it's a top-down outdoor area, are you going to make just one little square of web, in which case things just walk around it? Are you going to make a bigger, wider wall of web, in which case things probably still walk around it? Are you going to have to create a circle of web around you to now protect you, in which case it doesn't operate the same as it does in a dungeon? And so and it also means you had to write the code twice. So there's an interface twice, the code's twice. And how effective it is varies dramatically. And so over time, I had to kind of weed out writing multiple games in one game. And the one I eventually settled on was the tile graphic version.
Right.
And even though I started with 3D, Akalabeth was the first 3D game. But the reason I stuck with tile graphic is, one, I knew it the best. That was sort of my biggest personal innovation, I felt, or most useful innovation. And it let me do things like, say, if there was a ring sitting on a table, you could see the ring sitting on a table, and you could interact with it with clicking on it. And in 3D, small objects become mud in a distance pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so I thought 2D was really the way for me to continue the main stream of Ultimas. But it was with sadness that I just kind of began to abandon the 3D. Well, that was right about the same time Paul Neurath, who had done a number of other, he'd done some space games with us and other things, he was interested in doing 3D fantasy role-playing games. And so as we were talking, it just seemed like that since that was right at the point where I was sort of abandoning 3D, we go like, well, let's just keep these in the same fiction together, and you can kind of sort of continue the line of 3D Ultima, while I continue the line of the top-down tile graphic view Ultima.
Right.
And so that's really what started it. Paul and his team ran almost completely independently. We did share fictional activities, and we played each other's role played. We gave each other user interface feedback and played together. And the fiction teams were often the same people, and the artists were often the same people. But otherwise, the projects ran largely independently. And so it's really Paul that deserves the credit for that really great game.
And they are really good games. I believe they are.
Yeah, I think they are too.
But I mean, I think that with the Elder Scrolls, when that came out, like when Arena came out, that became the game changer for dungeon crawlers, which would eventually become 3D and open world.
That's I wouldn't argue with that, but yeah.
Yeah, but now we're getting into Ultima Online, which this is your greatest creation, period. In your book, you mentioned how difficult it was to. There it is. Sorry, I can't help but quote Jeff Goldblum. There it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But like in your book, you talk a lot about Ultima Online and how you tried to pitch the idea to EA, and they won't they wouldn't budge. Like you kept coming back to them every 6 months. So let's get into that.
Well, let's even go back pre-EA. So okay. The idea for Ultima Online predates our relationship with EA by a long shot. In fact, if you remember, the old dial-up bulletin board services like Genie and AOL, there were games, there were text MUDs, multiplayer text MUDs on those systems.
Right.
There were sometimes graphical MUDs on those systems.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and a lot of those, there was even an air combat one, Genie Air Warriors. And a lot of those made good money. And especially made good money for a small team that was selling into a modest market of number of players, but also those players would pay a lot of money for it, meaning most at this point in time, people were paying by the hour to be connected. Right. So not even a monthly subscription, it was pay by the hour. And but the number of people, the largest selling one of those, if you look at Genie Air Warriors, all those, the largest of all of them had, something like 10 or 15,000 players. And this was at a time when Ultimas were moving from hundreds of thousands of players into the millions of players. And so when almost every year, because again, Ultima was a simulation of pen and paper gaming as a group. So we were always looking to figure out a way to tie people together and make it a more social group experience. But we would sit down and we would talk to Kesmai, we would talk to Genie, we would talk to all these companies and say, we really want to make this thing. We called it Multima, multiplayer Ultima. And so we'd sit down and pitch Multima, and they were actually very interested in doing it. They wanted us to put it on their platform, but we would run the numbers, and even for us, we'd go, this isn't going to work. 10 or 15,000 players, even as much as they could pay, that we could imagine them paying, it wouldn't pay for the development of any existing Ultima. No. Ultimas were more expensive than there were enough players to support. And so every year we decide the time is not right yet, right. And we'd go back to the drawing board and go make another solo player Ultima. Then the World Wide Web came into existence.
Yep.
And as soon as that started, literally the day it was announced, it was actually Star Long who came to me and said, and he had already been an associate producer on the Wing Commander series. And he came to me and said, Richard, now is the time. Now is the time because the World Wide Web is going to bring the internet into everyone. It's going to grow incredibly quickly, and the cost of use of it's going to go down basically to zero. And so all of our players will soon join us now, be able to join us in an online game. And we did a quick analysis. We said we were immediately completely convinced this was the time, especially because it takes 3 years or so to make a game. We said, even though the market's not there yet, we need to start now, just so we'll be ready in 3 years when the market is big enough. And so the way things work at Electronic Arts and many big companies, this isn't just EA, is there is a green light process where anyone that wants to make a game within the company puts together a proposal. The proposal includes design documents, what's the game going to play like. It includes a technical analysis, what technology you have to build and how much is that going to cost. It includes a marketing analysis, how is it going to be sold, and from sales, what is their projections of how many people they could sell this to if you delivered this package. And when EA did that, their salespeople aren't gamers, right? They're statisticians in a sense. And so they would go, okay, let's see what the comparables are there on the market. And they went, well, the only comparable multiplayer games out there are things like Genie Air Warriors and these text MUDs and graphic MUDs. And, they've only sold at most 15,000 subscribers or players. And so let's suppose you are twice as successful as any game in history that's been online. We'll give you 30,000 customers. And you do that math, and that doesn't even come remotely close to selling enough to justify making the game. And so we went to our first pitch meeting, and we were given our first no. And we went like, oh, you guys just don't get it. Yeah. And so we waited 6 months. More and more news kept coming out about the growth of the internet, of the World Wide Web, and so you could see the hockey stick beginning to happen. And so we thought, okay, surely more people now understand this. We went in 6 months later, made the same pitch, made those arguments about this hockey stick to sales. The salespeople still didn't have the vision for it, and so they basically said 30,000 sales, no. 6 more months goes by. So literally our third time in the room, we make the same pitch, we get the same answer for the same logic. And basically, me and Star, no joke, we just don't leave the room. We're standing up at the front of this conference room with all the EA vice presidents, and Larry Probe sitting up the front, and we say, guys, you are wrong. You are wrong in so many ways. We just refuse to give up the podium. And so, for example, first of all, it's going to sell much more than that. But even if that wasn't true, right, the budget we're asking for is less than 10% of Origin's budget. We have earned the right to do this experiment, to do this. And at the very least, Larry, I have a letter here that I had pre-prepared that said, I will grant Richard and the UO team $250,000, which is a nit in the worldwide budget, to do a demo, a prototype of Ultima Online, to show you why you guys are all wrong. And they were still saying no, 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 and we just still stomped our feet and held our breath until Larry said, give me the damn piece of paper, I'll sign it. And so Larry signed the piece of paper, and we walked out of the room, and that started Ultima Online. But that also sort of ended our careers in a sense. We were now literally the pariah. The team was unsupported. Any hire that came into the company that any other team would want, the other members got. We had the worst office space. The company ignored us and tried to kill it, repeatedly. I mean, we really were pariahs up until the beta was ready. And we put up what was Electronic Arts' first website. They didn't even have an EA.com yet.
All right.
It was the UltimaOnline.com website. The website basically said, hey, we're the Ultima guys. We just made this game, Ultima Online. It's only beta. And we've already spent our $250,000 making the beta. And so we'd love for you to beta test it for us, but we can't afford to send discs to anybody unless you're willing to pay for the disc. And so please sign up here to pay us $5 to receive the beta disc. And immediately, more than 50,000 people signed up.
Damn.
And at that moment, EA got it. And suddenly we went from being the least desired thing happening at Electronic Arts to the most important thing happening at Electronic Arts. And suddenly we got not only had the floodgates of money, some of which helped, but we also got a flood of extra management from EA, right, which did not help. That all came down to sort of claim their piece of it, or put their mark on what it was that we were doing. The team did the best they could, just stay hunkered down and finish the game. And when it did finally launch, it was the fastest-selling PC game in Origin and Electronic Arts history.
Yep, and it basically paved the way for MMOs like World of Warcraft, RuneScape.
All that. Yep.
So many great MMOs out there because of Ultima Online. In your book, you mentioned that you had some complications with the beta, like in terms of developing it.
Oh, well, there were tons of dead ends. The good news was the team we did assemble was a great team. They were a lot of the people who had built some of those text MUDs and graphical MUDs, and the few people that existed that had experience in making things like this were added to our team that already had experience making Ultimas. Right. And so that turned out to be a great mashup. But there were still some profound mistakes. One of my favorites was the attempt at a virtual ecology. We knew that we could never add in quests fast enough to keep people happy for extended periods of play. And so we thought we had this brilliant idea about how to create some form of automated quest development, where grass, if you let in a field, grass was actually something that grew, and then herbivores in the game would go eat that grass. And then since herbivores would need grass, they'd continue foraging farther and farther to look for it. And if there wasn't enough grass, the herbivores would die out. And if there was bountiful grass, the herbivores would repopulate.
Right.
And then we also set in carnivores. And the carnivores would consume the herbivores. And if the carnivores couldn't find enough natural prey, they might go into the village and start eating villagers. Yeah. And if the carnivores were eating villagers because the ecology is out of whack, then the villagers would give out quests like, hey, the wolves literally are coming into town and eating our kids. Right. Please go save us from them. And so when we tested this in isolation ourselves, it worked great. But as soon as we launched it in the beta test, the players killed all the herbivores and all the carnivores so fast that even if we turned the spawn rate up to basically immediately put stuff back on the map as people are killing it. There was never enough time. Nothing survived for enough time to get into town to cause us trouble and therefore generate a quest. And so eventually, all of that had to be removed, and no one ever noticed. I mean, it was literally a ton of work we put in that literally no one ever saw.
And that really sucks, because that's innovation right there. Because you don't see the world as lively as that, because it's you're not only putting world building into it, but you're bringing real life aspects into it, which would make it stand up over time.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But there were a lot of things that didn't work. But amongst the things that didn't work too was another funny one that happened at the time when they released the beta. So since EA's sales projections for us was 30,000 units lifetime, and we immediately knew it was going to be at least hundreds of thousands, we then also realized we'd made a world that was much too small. Yeah. As big, it was huge. It was already huge, but we knew that the servers wouldn't handle, and there wouldn't be enough places for people to build a house in the world that we built. And so we're going to have to split the world into multiple, what we now call shards, multiple copies, multiple servers.
Right. This goes back to Ultima 1.
But this was really disappointing to me, because I was going like, wow, that means the people playing in server A have a different experience than people staying in server B. And in fact, if your friend starts in server B and you're in server A, you won't even meet each other. And I'm going like, oh, this is terrible, 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 terrible. One might evolve to being a PvP type focused, and the other one might end up being evolving differently. And again, if you end up in the wrong one compared to your play interests, this is terrible. And so that's when I helped work out this piece of fiction about since this was set in the time of just after Ultima 1, we said, look, well then the end of Ultima 1 is the destruction of the Gem of Immortality that breaks in all these shards, that we'd already used the shards, as you pointed out earlier in our discussions, for the Shadow Lord. So it already has this ongoing ripple. So we said, let's use those fragments. Well, let's say that at that moment, there were copies of the state of the world stored in each of those shards. And so each of these server sets is one of those shards. And those shards, we were going to scatter into the landscape around the players. And the theory is that players could then work to collect these shards, find a way to mold them back together, and maybe reunify servers periodically. Kind of put them back together was the theory.
Right.
But at least that made me feel comfortable that these apparent separated realities had a common history. And so that was comfortable enough. We called the servers the shards. We never actually made that quest completable. But because we were still caught up in making more and more and more and more and more and more shards.
Right.
For years and years. And but still, despite scaling it up as fast as we could, the worlds all still became significantly overloaded, and so poor world performance was one of the many launch problems that occurred. Problems due to success that occurred.
Right. And of course, EA, they made a lot of money from that, and I mean, usually that's how it goes in an industry like this, where sometimes you just have to, show them, just to prove your point.
Yes, but again, not to throw EA into the bus, but I'm going to throw EA into the bus again. The Evil Empire.
The Evil Empire.
and again, it's less evil than it is just large corporation.
Would you say that you're the Darth Vader?
I hope not.
That you weren't really the evil one, but you joined the Emperor.
Yes, I don't know. Maybe that's a. Oh, gee, I hope not. But yeah, that's another way. But it's interesting to see what also happened here. So after Ultima 8, despite its problems,
yes,
EA also recognized that I tried to do it their way, and so they were forgiving at the very least. They didn't necessarily take part of the blame themselves, but they also knew that we give it a shot. Let's get on and make Ultima 9.
Yes.
And so at the beginning of Ultima Online, I've already told you they did not want it, right? And the team was a pariah. And so up until the beta, the EA was absolutely in the camp of, we do not want you, Richard, to be working on Ultima Online. We only want you, Richard, and wish all of the money and all of the team members were working on Ultima 9, period. That was 100% their opinion.
Right.
It was difficult for me to get support for UO, and I could only get support for Ultima 9. And so up until the beta, that's how it went. Ultima 9 was clearly the dominant interest. UO had negative interest.
And Ultima 9 was supposed to come out in 1996. That was the original year it was supposed to come out.
Correct. Now what happened, though, is as soon as the beta test proved that Ultima Online was going to be a monumental success, EA flipped. And they went, Richard, we don't want you working on Ultima 9 anymore. Let's cancel it.
Oh, God.
And we only think that UO is really the only thing that you should be working on. If any time you're not spending on UO is a distraction to making this incredibly important thing happen, cancel, move all the team members over and cancel the project. And I'm going, screw you. I'm going, I followed your advice for Ultima 8 to my demise. You insisted that I keep going on Ultima 9, and you were insisting that I stop on UO, and I kept it going until I could prove to you that this was something worthwhile. I'm happy to now that we're going to do this, but I refuse to cancel Ultima 9 on your whipsaw whims, which have no understanding of the bigger picture here. But what we did do is we still needed most of the teams. The majority of the team of Ultima 9 moved over to help Ultima Online because they were obviously part of the same team. But one or two people stayed on Ultima 9 to try to keep the technology evolving to keep up with the changing times. And so after Ultima Online came out, we then tried to go back to reassembling and growing back to scale the Ultima 9 team, to which EA was still not interested.
Right.
They basically said, you know what, we're just not interested in Ultima 9. We really think you should get on to Ultima Online 2, and only Ultima Online 2. And we actually told them at the time, they wanted us to start Ultima Online 2 the day Online 1 shipped. And we were telling them, you don't understand online games. It's going to take us 5 years to grow this engine, to grow this product. And if we start Ultima Online 2 right now, which we did based on their insistence, we're going to be chasing a moving target of features, right? Every feature that Ultima Online 1 puts in, we will also have to put into Ultima Online 2. And so it's going to make Ultima Online 2 take at least 5 years and a lot of money to chase the moving target of Ultima Online 1. And they went, we don't care, it's the right thing to do, we're going to have these things sequenced, so start Ultima Online 2. So begrudgingly, Star and the core of the UO team, some part of it is stripped off to go do Ultima Online 2. But I refused to not do Ultima 9. And so I finished Ultima 9, but without the support of EA management. Only by force of will. And knowing that even getting Ultima Online done had already lost me the majority of my political capital within EA, finishing Ultima 9 kind of, completely expired my political capital within EA.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, with Ultima Online, it was doing good, but you still wanted to finish the Ultima story, Right. But
maybe more after that. I think a solo player game and an online game have very different feel. There are things you can do in an online game that are completely unique and incredibly powerful, and obviously there's good money in it. But what you can't do that well is tell a subtle, twisting tale like we've been discussing about all the solo player games.
Right. You're definitely a fighter when it comes to your creations, you've shown that in your book as well, but
by the way, if I can just dwell on that for a second, I think that's the only way to do anything.
Yeah.
If you don't,
that's how to do anything in life is fight for it.
Yeah, if your podcast starts having trouble, I doubt that you will turn tail and run at the first sign of weakness. You will sit down and go like, wait, man, I was having so much fun. I actually thought I was making a meaningful contribution. What went wrong? Is it the format? Is Richard Garriott talk too long and we have to take 4 hours to tell all this stuff? Is that the problem? Or is it something else? And so you will fight to fix it before letting it die.
Right.
And I think that every project, every company, every project, every piece of art, every worthy endeavor will have moments, or at least are at risk of having moments, where it nearly winks out. And I would at least argue that none of my best successes, Ultima 4, as we said, Ultima 7, as we said, Ultima Online, as we said, getting myself to space, going to the poles, going to the deepest parts of the ocean.
Yep, going to see the
none
Titanic.
None of those things would have happened. None would happen if I wasn't willing to, be told no, and go like, well, I really want to do it. How am I going to get around that?
So we're now getting into Ultima 9 here. So, of course, over time, the computer graphics were changing. The industry was changing. Everything was going from, standard 2D graphics in games to, using 3D engines.
And the boxes get bigger and bigger.
Yes. And Ultima 9 has perhaps the best looking box. I mean, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Ultima 6, I still have a soft spot for.
Yeah, 6 too, but
yeah.
Ultima 9 had the package. So, honestly, like, I don't really want to bash on Spoony because, I know this is how your series got popular, on the internet is through Spoony. But, like...
Well, let me learn about Spoony for. So essentially, a lot of people. So I consider Spoony a really good friend.
Oh yeah.
And but only after I saw his critiques, and a lot of people are going like, why in the world? I mean, this guy's like ripping you, and I'm going like, no, you don't understand how he's doing it. The fact that Spoony would, for example, play any one of my games, but I'll use the what's a paladin example in Ultima 9.
Paladin?
What's a paladin is the quintessential Spoony example. When he would get completely incensed and just scream in terror about how dumb this was, he was making in my mind, two parts. One is he's actually kind of right. Why was the guy doing that? But more importantly, it's obvious that he both really cares. He is a huge super fan. Mm-hmm. He is a super fan. And therefore, that gives him the right, in my mind, to go, I clearly still love this, but I'm going to still call it like it is and say that I don't think the avatar should say that. Now, we, of course, had similar debates in the company, which go back to, this has gone on it's now been 40 years there have been Ultimas. 40 years.
No.
And so... clearly, the players that were playing 40 years ago cannot be the complete the subset or the universal group of who's playing today, right? It can't be the same people. Some people have to have churned out, and I sure hope some new people have come in.
All right.
And when those new people come in, you can't assume they know the stories of all the other ones. They don't know who the Shadow Lords were. They don't know who Batlin was.
Right.
They don't know why the virtues were good and then somehow they turned bad. They don't know that Lord British, is he a good guy? Is he purely good guy? They don't know. And so it is reasonable for us to go, we have to explain some of that again. And even though we know that people who have played the game before, won't need it, but we've got to figure out a way to bring new players along. However, there's also limits to what was probably good art, and so the What's a Paladin is just a really good example of it. We probably wrote for too low a presumption. Anybody playing Ultima 9 has probably played role-playing games of one kind or another, and so that's probably below the purview. But it was a fun debate, and so I did not mind his critique at all, and I didn't mind, like, in that same area. I think that same character you could continue to shoot with arrows from a long way away and never die, and and he would just point out these little edge cases. But those edge cases all exist in all games, right? We can't have you kill the guy before you talk to him because he's got important information, and the guy can't get up to you to fight back, and so we just had to make him immortal until we resolved that. And so finding these edge cases is always good fun. Finding out how to kill Lord British is always good fun.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if it wasn't for Spoony, like, I probably wouldn't love the Ultima series as much as I do now. I mean, I used to play them as a kid, but I never really thought of them like that, the way that Spoony did. And, I owe a lot to him because, I mean, he inspired me to make videos and do reviews and stuff like that. And I understand, he's in a bad place right now, and I hope the best for him. I really do.
As do I, and but I really think the his contributions are,
Oh,
even though
yes.
I know a lot of people. I mean, it's fascinating how the same positives you and I see. Some people worry that that the critiques are too awful,
Right.
or something like that.
And
But I'm going like, no, it's not. It's completely
no.
from a point of love and passion.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I did make a tweet to Spoonie because he did say something that I just, I hate seeing miserable people.
Yeah.
I really do, because it's like, I understand that you're feeling miserable, but look at what all you've done, and what
Totally agree.
community you've created.
Yeah, we had him down on my property down in Austin, and we filmed a fun,
Yes.
Universe the Avatar bit. It was just great fun. So yeah, I hope he, gets through this dark phase well,
I hope so too.
and gets back into helping us all have,
Yeah.
to
You,
be that roaster that he does so well.
Spoonie, you owe us a Shroud of the Avatar review.
Absolutely, I expect to get fully roasted.
Yes, roast Lord British to the extent. If not,
Indeed,
then I will.
I am at your service.
But let's talk about Ultima 9. So obviously, like with Ultima 9, there's issues in terms of the story, but like were some of these issues beyond your control, or like
It depends which ones you might talk about. So the main.
it's a paladin and the
Oh,
Codex of Ultimate Wisdom?
so no, I would actually say those sort of issues, the artistry issues of those sort of choices, were purely mine and the team. So
Right.
if you want to pick on any of those, the buck stops here. Uh, but the issues of, it was sort of a little bit buggy when it came out, and there were
Yeah,
some polish issues.
crash
That again
prone.
goes back to the fact that I had no corporate support for getting this out. I was fighting tooth and nail for every
Right.
day that we had to try to do this a little bit better. And so for that, I blame the evil corporate overlord. But
And I
but for the art, for the what's a paladin, just blame me.
right, and I saw some actual pre images of Ultima 9, like before you guys decided to go all 3D. Like it sort of looked like Ultima 8.
Yeah. No, in fact, it had some Ultima 8 sprites on top of a more polygonal background. So I'm not sure we did in those early demos, but we technologically could have smoothly rotated the view
Right.
around some sprite-like objects. Eventually, even the sprite-like objects went away into full 3D. But and again, that was when the team only had one or two people on it during the UO period to make sure we stayed up with the times. Because
Right.
again, this is right when 3D hardware was coming of age. So we, at the beginning, we really couldn't count on it, and by the end, we could count on it. So
Yeah, and if you didn't have the right accelerator card, you were just you were ship without a paddle.
yeah. Well, but again, and this is I think something people really underestimate with the challenge of making games in general is the shifting hardware underneath us.
Yes.
For example, I think it was in Ultima 5, but it could be 6 or 7. Maybe you'll know and correct me here if I get it wrong. But the DOS operating system
Right.
had in an early PCs had only generally 640K of memory. And so the Windows operating system you could only type in a physical address for 000
Right.
up to 640K. But the manufacturers of the hardware were already universally putting in, 8 chips for 8 bits, but those chips were megabit chips. And so instead of having 640K, they all had 1 megabit. And so literally every PC made actually physically had a megabyte, but the operating system would only let you read or write out of the first 640K. And so we were very accustomed to cheating the hardware. I mean, almost every game we cheated the hardware. That's how we made our games look better than other games,
Oh
is
yeah.
by taking advantage of these moments. And so we wrote something we called the Voodoo Memory Management System.
Voodoo.
And so Voodoo Memory, what it did is we would take a bank of maybe 16K, or maybe 64K, I don't remember exactly how much, out toward the very end of that 640K, and we could remap it into this unaddressable space, this extra memory that no other game, the operating system, nobody had access to, but we knew was there reliably. And so we could store stuff out there. And so we could make a bigger, better game because we could use the full megabyte. And at the moment we shipped the game, it was great, and that was brilliant.
Right.
But then Microsoft changed the operating system. And they also realized they needed to reach that extra megabyte. And so after we launched, and this is before the internet, so you can't patch, they changed the operating system that they distributed to everybody to where natively it could address that memory, but that meant that our memory management system was now destroyed.
Right.
And so we then got blamed for this. We got blamed immediately. People going like, "Oh, those Origin folks writing this unstable piece of crap. Why can't they, write code that works within the operating system? Blah 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 blah." And it's like, hey, when we released the game, it was brilliant, and it can't be faulted for a change in the operating system after the fact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Ultima 9 certainly did a lot of things, I think. I think it's as bad as everybody says it is? I've played much worse.
Yeah, I actually really like it. So, where I am, I'm actually disappointed in what the Ultimate we shipped, but I believe we could have shipped a great one. I actually really like Ultima 9. I agree with the spoony-ish complaints of Fountain. But to me, those don't change fundamentally the core of the game.
Oh, yeah.
They're just things to be pointed out.
Was there plans for an Ultima 10?
Yes, in fact, I think it's not in this drawer. Yeah, no, I have the design docs for Ultima 10 somewhere in this office. So yes, there was a plan for an Ultima 10, but they really were not ever much more than paper.
Right. So it never materialized.
Correct. Now, after I left EA, they tried to resurrect it using Andy Hollis, I even think, to help try to run it, but that didn't go very far.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you look back at this period like, there's a lot of things that you succeeded in and a lot of things that you failed in, but, like, do you look at this period with, good intentions? Like, we're learning?
Oh, totally. Yeah. In fact, I would say every Ultima, all of them, had areas where I felt we made, 2 good steps forward, and every Ultima had at least 1 good step backwards.
Right.
Or things you tried that just didn't work. But by the time, again, especially after Ultimas 1 and 2, and you're doing now these things, you're doing it commercially, not just artistically. You recognize that, if you make a mistake, often you've got to just continue, right? You can't,
right.
You don't have the time or money to go back and make everything perfect. And so you really have to start choosing your battles and go like, what in this game, what are the essential things I really must get right? So I'm going to solve those first.
Right.
And what are the things that, I think that's the right way to do it. But if I'm wrong, it's okay. I can just leave it out of the game if I really had to. and so there's tons. Every game has things that, things you must do that you do well, things that you didn't think were going to be important that become important, and things that, you thought you would do that didn't work at all, and you just rip them out, or people don't like it, one or the other. Leave it in and people don't like it, or throw it away. And but so all of them include all that.
Right. Ultima Online is probably your greatest achievement, period, because, I mean, look at MMOs now.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is, depending on who I'm talking to, they have a different, it's like saying, what's your favorite virtue? I'm going like, well, I don't really have one anymore.
Yeah, and I asked you.
Yeah, I debate them with myself all the time. I actually try to describe them in a way which makes them equal. So it's a really tough thing for me. And so for me, I Ultima 1, 2, and 3, I was really just learning so fast about just how to put a game together. If I had to pick one that I'm most proud of as being visionary in the face of literally no one else believed it, I would really say Ultima 4.
Oh yeah.
If I had to say, what do I think is the best told story, the best one, what's the one that's the most finished, that I'm actually just from a craft standpoint, that I think is the best? When did I do my craft the best? I might say Ultima 7. But if you then say which one had by far the biggest social and economic impact, there's no question it's Ultima Online. And so to me, it kind of depends on,
Right.
whether truth, love, and courage are more important to you at the moment.
Right. Because some people might say that Ultima 6 was groundbreaking, or
No,
Ultima 5.
and it was, like in Ultima 6, the starting with the cover and the way that story unfolded, it was Ultima. Anyway, so yeah, so pick your favorite. Hard to
Yeah.
hard to distinguish.
So how do you feel though that now people look at your Ultima series, some with good minds, and can realize that without, Ultima, there would be no other RPGs. Like, it set the groundwork for everything.
Well, obviously, I feel very fortunate to have been the right age at the right time to get started right at the beginning. So, I obviously think I'm egotistical enough to think I'm a reasonably smart guy. I know that I work
Right.
hard when I'm inspired to do so, at least. And then I was really lucky. The third piece was I really was lucky to be there as this emerged, and just old enough to really take it on, as a personal life passion. And I can't remember. Did I tell you the story of a writer by the name of Bruce Sterling who writes
Bruce
Cyberpunk?
Sterling?
Yeah.
I don't think you have.
Well, so at an early game developers conference, another Austin, Texas native, a guy named Bruce Sterling, he writes cyberpunk type game books. At least he did back then. He may be on to other things now. But he came to give a talk at GDC, which I, of course, attended. And he said, look, he said, I'm not sure why they invited me here because I don't work on games. I write books. He said, but one of the things I did is I began to think about the challenge of writing books versus the challenge of writing games. And he says, when I write a book, I'm trying to write the very best book ever written. Why would I have any less goal than the best? He said, however, the odds of writing the best book ever written is actually pretty low. He said there have been a lot of writers over a lot of time that have written a lot of really good books. And the top 10, whatever your criteria is for describing the top 10, that list has probably been stable for hundreds of years as to the best books ever written.
Right.
He said, however, so the odds of getting there is zero, close. He said, however, if I get a book into the top 10 of all the best books ever written, it'll probably stand for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so hard to get there. He said, you guys have the opposite problem. He said, games have only existed for 10 years. And so statistically, the odds of writing the best game ever written are actually pretty darn good. He said, not only that, but the machines are making it easier and easier. Not only that, but people are figuring out the art form better and better, and more skillful at the way they're putting these things together. And so even if you do write the very best game ever written, 10 years from now, it definitely will not be the best game ever written. There will be better artists, better machines, better technology. You will your best of will probably fade. And he said, but the worst is that the machines to even see your work on are disappearing. And at that time, this machine where I wrote my first games was already mothballed in my closet. We're on to PCs.
Right.
And so already, a Calibeth and Ultima 1 and maybe even Ultima 2 did not exist on the machines of the day. You could not play them on machines of the day. And so when Bruce said that, it was like a dagger in my heart. It was like, oh my God, he's talking to me. He's here I have been here from the beginning. I would like to believe that maybe one or two of my things have been worthy to be in that top 10. But I've already seen them not only surpassed, but the machines literally are disappearing. Even I can't play my own first games. And so after that, I resolved myself to do two things. One is I was going to get that machine up and running, and I was going to keep it running in my office ever since, and I have. So this machine is here because of Bruce Sterling.
Yeah.
The other thing I resolved after I kind of went, wow, that's kind of sad that no one's going to know or care or even see it. I said, but what I hope I do is that when people do pick up, one of the later ones,
Yeah.
that there will be things about them whether it's the 3D, whether it's the virtues, whether it's how I do cover art, whether it's the tarot cards, whether it's the word avatar, whether it's the term MMOs, whether it's the term shards, that even in the most modern game, they'll see echoes that go back all the way to the beginning.
Yep.
And that will be the way that I can feel okay about my hypothetically really great art, fading out with time.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure your kids will get into it as well.
Well, so here's what I do with my kids. My kids play Shroud of the Avatar.
Shroud. Let's get into that Shroud of the Avatar.
So, yeah, and so, but my kids play it. But it's really funny that they'll be playing Minecraft. They're really into Minecraft right now,
right?
And they will see terms pop up like Avatar or Shard, and or how crafting kind of works, in various ways, or the interconnection between roles. And I'll go, where that started, right? And at this point, they're already like, yes, Dad, we know you did it first, so I've already jaded my children. I mean, they've never seen any of this stuff.
It's already starting. Yeah. So, Shroud of the Avatar, I mean, no one expected you to come back and make and it comes with a box. Of course it does.
Absolutely.
You're like the Phil Swift of, RPGs. You could sell an RPG, in a box and have a smile.
Absolutely. Yeah, this one I guess never even opened this one. So yeah, this one still has this nice
and it has maps.
crisp map here in the front and the certificates, etc. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So tell me, what inspired you to make Shroud of the Avatar?
Well, so after I left EA, the one thing I did not want to do was create a medieval fantasy. Because I was going I'd already done it for almost 30 years, and I was just ready to clear and do something else, and that's what brought up Tabula Rasa. Let me do something completely different.
Yeah.
But then, as I then thought about but fantasy is really still my thing. I really enjoy fantasy, and so I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to and I'd already thought of a number of times, how would I ever compete with stories about ethical parables and virtues? Would I ever leave that for something, else? And I'm well, the only other else I know of is go back to big, here's the big evil bad guy. Your job is to kill him because you're told the instructions. I'm going I'm not going there. I'm not. And I've already tried to invent other ethical systems like unity, trustworthiness. And I'm actually sitting going I really believe the ones that I've uncovered these virtues are really, they're really solid. Mm-hmm. And the good news is that the word Britannia is in the public domain, and now the word Avatar is in the public domain because EA gave it up. That truth, love, and courage are obviously public domain words, and so I could basically take my own IP, Lord British, build a new Britannia, still talk about ethical parables, including truth and love and courage, and sort of pick up where I left off, but without the Ultima game, which EA owned.
Unfortunately, they still own Ultima.
They still own.
Have you not tried to get the Ultima license back?
Oh yes, about every 5 years, I have a discussion with whoever the new head of EA is. And we usually mention, hey, wouldn't it be great for us to do this together? I mean, they own the IP, so in some way they'd have to be involved, either get a share of the money or be paid up front or be the publisher. Any of those would be possible. But something like that would have to be possible, and I know that. And usually the new senior staffer that I'm talking with goes, well, obviously that's a great idea. We're not doing anything with it, so yeah, let's do that. And I'm saying, okay, well, good luck to you. You bring me back a contract, and we'll get going. And universally, every time we start that, they do polling around the inside of EA, and inevitably some of their other senior producers or other senior management are still there. Go nope, we're just not interested. Either we still hate Richard so much, or they don't say that, but that may be the case behind the scenes.
Maybe.
Or what they actually tell me is that the property, the people who get first crack at any property that's owned by the company are people still in the company, and there's too many people who still believe they have plans for it. But that's been true for decades now, and has been false for decades now. But in the end, they basically don't want to talk.
So do you think they're just trying to keep the license away from you?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. I just think they don't know what to do with it. There are people internally that go, "Hey, I want a piece of that."
Right, but
give it up externally.
But it's like, what? How can you not think of anything if you have an IP and you're not gonna do anything with it? Then just give it up.
I agree. And if I had been smarter at the time of the acquisition, I would have put in the contract that if you leave it fallow for 10 years, it comes back to me.
Right, and that should be the case.
Yeah. In fact, maybe we can get my wife's working in politics right now. Maybe I can get them to pass a new law.
Yes, but if EA ever decided to do a remake of Ultima, would you step in and make sure that it goes off well?
Sure.
Like if they ever did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's also interesting about that is I think there have been a number of movies made about a number of games over the years, and what's interesting is there are a few, not many, which are pretty good, but for the most part, I think the game is of almost no value to the movie maker. Because the games are usually, hey, look, go kill the bad guy. They're waiting at the last level for you. Right. And it's like that intellectual property has almost no value. All you're doing is using the name to sell people who like the name and use that as the basis of your audience to finally make a movie. I actually think, on the other hand, Ultima actually has real depth to its IP. And so I think that not only could you continue to make great Ultima games, but I think you could exploit the IP or utilize the IP, expand the IP into a variety of other mediums too.
Yeah, make spin-off games like you did before.
Right, exactly. I think a lot of things like popular would be possible.
So with Shroud of the Avatar, it's basically a spiritual successor to Ultima.
Yep, exactly.
And you're basically in your interview with Spoonie, you said that you were going back to your roots and that you didn't believe in certain things like having quest logs, and I believe you were expecting people to take notes.
Yes, so I think most of the oldest school people remember fondly taking notes. And Galara, the head of the Ultima Dragons, was just showing on Twitter a couple days ago all of her notes for the Ultimas.
They're cool.
And but yes, I initially started with completely hardcore in that sense. One, it takes time to make auto mappers and quest logs. Two, quest logs force the quest to be in a format you can do a log with, which I think diminishes the variety of quests. And so I was basically going to put it all back in the player's hands. Now, in the end, I couldn't stand that ground completely. And as we were beta testing the game, players basically demanded that they had to have some level of support. So we put in more of that than I had told Spoonie we would. But my real goal with Shroud of the Avatar was to kind of put together the following two pieces. Solo player Ultima's always told great stories that we've talked about a lot. Ultima Online, which was hugely commercially successful, had almost no Lord British story in it, right? No. It had the echo of the virtues that you could talk about, and you could even gain karma or lose karma over, but there was no story of the many that we've just discussed about whether it's about racism or whether it's about what would you do if you wake up and you're in a terrorist camp, or what would you do if if everyone around you believes you're converting people to Satan worship, whatever it might be. None of that kind of story could go into Ultima Online or any other MMO yet. And so my goal with Shroud of the Avatar was to say, look, I believe playing with other people is really important. It's a powerful mechanic that ties you to the world. Having a world where you can build a house and collect things and show them off to your friends is powerful and important. So I want to be able to make this multiplayer environment. On the other hand, I also want to be able to tell the Lord British story. I want to be able to put in narrative. But the problem with narrative in a multiplayer setting is that if everyone who finds the magic sword, pulls Excalibur from from the stone, is coming to Lord British to be knighted as champion, then there's going to be a giant queue outside Lord British's throne room with everybody having their copy of the one sword, to wait their turn to be knighted. Like, that's just not cool. And a solo player game does that great, but a multiplayer game does it horribly. And so what we've created with Shroud of the Avatar is a game that can flip between spaces that are truly massively multiplayer-like to spaces that are as small or solo player as we want, so that when it comes time to bring in your one sword and get your knighting, no one else is in the scene with you. And so we can give the illusion of I am the most important person who's ever lived, while also letting you be in an environment with all your friends at the same time. So that was what we were trying to do with Shroud of the Avatar. I think we did a pretty good job of it. There are places that's stronger and weaker than others, but considering we did this, a modern MMO, if you look at any AAA title released from a major publisher, they're spending a couple $100 million making it. We did ours crowdfunded, and so our total spending was less than $20 million. And so for 1/10 the budget,
right,
I think we did a pretty good job.
That's right. That was actually kickstarted. So what made you guys decide to start the Kickstarter? And,
Well, it was really seeing the success of our former partner Chris Roberts with Star Citizen. We had talked about Kickstarter. We thought, nobody's going to raise, and we need many millions of dollars at least, to make an MMO, and there were no Kickstarter examples pulling anywhere close to that kind of money.
No.
And until Star Citizen, and Star Citizen came out and raked in, tens of millions, within the first week, and continues to this day to rake in crowdfunding money, and now is in the hundreds of millions of crowdfunded money.
That and Mighty Number 9 and Blood Ritual of the Night. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the time,
Bloodstain, sorry.
Example. But he was the first
Bloodstain
example.
Ritual of the Night. I'm sorry.
That's what we said we can do it too.
But yeah, I mean, if you definitely have the backing for it, you can make anything.
Right.
Like, if you wanted to make an MMORPG tomorrow, just have the idea and sell it to people.
Yep.
So, what would you say, like, outside of your gaming endeavors, was the best thing that ever happened to you?
Well,
because in your book, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there is a lot of stuff. And, and now being married with children now, every time I start to answer that question, I always have to pause and go, I obviously have to say, my wife and children are number one.
Yes.
But if you mean outside of that, there's no question space is number one. I mean, I really enjoy getting into what feel like fundamentally alien environments where the things you see are awesome in the proper definition of the term, meaning they create awe in you. And space does that all the time. Everything about it, the training.
And you still go to space.
Being there. Yeah, so if you get a chance, go.
Oh, yes, I am.
But slightly more practical is going to the interior of Antarctica. So I've been there twice. And in both cases...
You talked about that in your book where you went to the Antarctica and you almost slipped off of a mountain.
I did, and I fell down. And actually, one of my friends was there with me. I kind of, as I was falling on the smooth ice, well, it wasn't me that pulled her down. It was actually the camp manager pulled this friend of mine down and broke her collarbone. It was it's terrible. But and she had to stay on the ice there for most of a month with no medical care with a broken collarbone. But probably one of my best memories from the interior of Antarctica was the winds. If you think about heat and air rise, imagine the Earth here in front of us. Warm air rises around the equator, right, travels to the North and South Pole, where it comes down cold at the South Pole, and then spreads out from the poles. So if you're at the South Pole, the winds generally go north.
Yep.
And so if you are on the north side of a mountain range in Antarctica, the winds always come from the south across that mountain range, and then kind of whip, like make a constant washing machine on the downwind side of the mountain. And what that does is the ice thickness in Antarctica is an average of 2 miles thick. And that scouring will dig like a barrel cut in the ice that goes along the mountain range for miles and miles and miles. And so when you go hike down in there, it looks like a Tim Burton movie where there's a frozen tidal wave that goes for miles.
Nightmare
Before Christmas. And there's literally snow drifting off the leading edge of it. And you're looking into this blue ice, expecting to see like a frozen whale or a mammoth or something looking back at you, which never is there, of course. But it's really it's awesome. It's like literally, it's hard to imagine how alien it feels to be in a place like the interior of Antarctica.
My favorite thing, though, that you've done, in the book where you went to space with Stephen Hawking.
Oh yeah,
how was that?
Yeah, we took him on a zero-G flight. So Stephen,
how was he as a person?
Really wanted to go to space. He had said it many times. Commercial suborbital vehicles still aren't available yet, sadly. But when the group of us that started this company called Zero G Corp heard him talking about how much he really wanted to go to space, we thought, well, we can't get him into space yet, but we can take him on this Zero G flight. And so we contacted him and his medical team. He really wanted to go. The plane needs to give you about 2 Gs of during the pullout between the 0 Gs. And we talked about that. It seemed like that would probably be medically acceptable. And so about 20 of us got together and kind of contributed the funds ourselves to put together 2 days of flying for Stephen. And he came out and joined us in Florida, where on day 1, we rehearsed how we were going to do this, how we were going to get him out of his wheelchair, into a seat in a plane, then to the front of the plane where we would lie him down, have a ton of medical equipment hooked up to him to make sure like his heart rate and blood pressure and other things stayed fine, because he wouldn't be able to communicate distress. And then the second day, we actually planned to make flights with Stephen. And our mantra during this event was, "Don't kill Stephen Hawking."
Yes.
And so we thought, we were being so careful. And we thought on the day that we were going to fly him, we said, look, we're going to make 1 parabolic flight. If he experiences 0 G once, first of all, we can't, once you start, you can't really stop until it's done. So we will get through once. But then the question at the end of once is, how bad will he be, right? Will he be alive? Will he be sick? What's his status going to be? And so we said, if we get in 1 and we call it quits, we've had a big success. And maybe we'll get in a second or third. But normally we stop at 12. And the reason we stop at 12 is that even normal-bodied people become at significantly higher risk of getting sick or nauseous up there. And you really don't want to get Stephen sick either, just because that could make breathing difficult. And so we said, okay, let's plan on 1, and we'll see what happens after that. So we took him up on this flight, and it was really amazing, just because he was obviously so thrilled to get a chance to do it. We were also thrilled to be with him for this moment.
What was he like, though, as a person?
Oh, he's, what I think most people don't understand about Stephen was how glib he is. So here's a guy that every word he has to say, he has to go through if you watch him talk through his computer monitor, he has a cursor that says, like, here's like 100 words on a screen. And the cursor will go, do you want the word in the top half or the bottom half, or the top half or the bottom half? And he could flinch his cheek, and it would click. Oh, you mean the bottom half? Do you mean the left of those or the right of those? The left of the rows, the right? Click. Oh, okay. You need these words. When he gets down to about 10 words, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Click. Oh, is this the word you wanted? If yes, select it. That word gets put on what he's going to say. So slow, painfully slow. But what he does is you'll basically, when you go to talk to him, you're largely talking at him. And so until you've done it a few times, you you don't even know if he's really paying attention, because he really can't make any physical response to imply that he understands and is listening. He can't nod, nothing. And so you talk at him and you go like, well, I hope he liked what I said, but I don't really know. But then he'll be by himself for a little while, and what he does when he's by himself is compose responses. And so then maybe 30 minutes will go by, he'll come back in the room, and then he will speak. And because he's had a long time to think about what he wanted to say, right. His words are great. I mean, fantastic. And it's funny, and it's insightful, and it clearly expresses the joy he has for life. And and clearly makes it clear that he was clearly paying very close attention to everything anybody said.
And he's one of the smartest people in the world.
Oh no, yes, exactly, on the planet. So, yeah. In fact, it was funny when we'd heard him give some lectures and things. How he'll start at your level and pretty quickly sometimes go way over your head, going like, "Oh yeah, does he think I understand?" I really don't.
Yeah.
But we took him on his first parabola. It was a big success. His heart rate never moved. His blood pressure never moved, but he had a huge smile on his face. And his medical team, some of which are trained to interact with him only just by eye expression, said, "Okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to try a second one?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course he does." And so we did a second one, and we checked it with him again. And then we did a third, and then we did a fourth, and then we did like a fifth. And I can't remember where we stopped. And we stopped like 8 or 9. So we did 8 or 9 parabolas before he wanted to keep going. But the rest of us were like, no. Now's the time to stop.
Enough.
We're getting up into the probabilities of danger. So we shut him down.
Yeah, and he loved it then.
But then that's where I became sort of a good buddies with him. I've been to Cambridge many times to go see him in his office. The door around his office was always framed with pictures of him flying in zero G. He talked about how meaningful it was for him to have, for the first time in the majority of his life, gotten out of his wheelchair and been able to float freely. I mean, so for him it was a hugely big deal on a personal and emotional level, and so was it for the rest of us to get a chance to be there with him.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a bucket list right there. Being able to go to space with Stephen Hawking.
Yep.
It's amazing that you actually got the chance to meet him. I mean, I'm jealous.
Yeah.
But it's sad. When I heard he passed away, it's like, no, he's a treasure. No.
Yeah, and as you probably know, he's lived 3 or 4 times longer than any other person with ALS.
Oh yeah.
And his family, I think, believes too that if he hadn't kind of gotten tripped up health-wise, he probably could have continued on.
I don't think that killed him. No.
Yeah.
But I think when I first opened this book, like there's a lot of things in this book you've done. You've went to Antarctica, you've went to space, but the Titanic one. Like when I first opened the book, I was like, I'm jealous of this guy, because that was something I wanted to do as a kid. I wanted to explore the Titanic because of the movie Titanic.
Right.
It inspired me to actually, like, I wanted to learn how to swim so I could, because I thought as a kid you didn't need a submarine to go swimming, in cold water. Like, I can handle the cold, I can swim deep.
Yep.
But anyway.
But not that deep.
Not that deep, no. But I was a kid,
Yeah.
Anyways, the Titanic, what was that like?
Well, so like you, the movie was obviously a huge deal, but what was interesting is
this was in
James
97.
Cameron. Sorry?
This was in 97, right? The movie came out.
Yes, and I first dove to the Titanic in 99, I think.
Oh.
So I'm a member of an organization here in New York called the Explorers Club, and through my connections at the Explorers Club, that's how I not only have done a lot of this exploration, but I've actually helped build a lot of the companies that have helped open up these frontiers. And so, for example, I've helped Adventure Networks International, which does the Antarctic interior operations. I was a part of Deep Ocean Expeditions, which chartered the Mir submersibles, those 2 orange submersibles you saw in the movie Titanic.
Yes.
James Cameron chartered those submarines from the company I was involved with called Deep Ocean Expeditions. And so once he did that, that meant that we knew where the Titanic was, right? And so So what was fascinating about that is so when we decided as the principals of the company, we want to go down to Titanic ourselves. Let's go. And Bob Ballard, who was the guy that discovered the Titanic, actually tried to stop us. I think that's in the book too. And he actually tried to get U.S. courts to create an injunction against us going, but it turns out, and the courts actually agreed, and they tried to stop us from going. But the company, Deep Ocean Expeditions, is a German company, and the Titanic is off the coast. It's in international waters, but off the coast of Canada. And so we were going like, wait a minute, U.S. judges don't even have any jurisdiction. And so then we went down there. We actually discovered that the reason why we think he didn't want us to go down there is because of the damage his process was doing to kind of rip Titanic apart. But anyway, who knows? But at this point, it's rusting away so fast that if anybody's going to salvage anything, they better do it now. And if anybody's going to go see it, they better do it now. And just don't go under sail.
Yeah, don't swim under.
Don't
make sure you have a submarine.
don't go underneath that tail and don't get stuck like I did.
Yeah. So I saw pictures of it in your book. You took some pictures of the Titanic, and just to know that it's been over 100 years now since the great Titanic tragedy, but knowing that you've done all this stuff, how does it make you feel as a person now?
Well, I use it as inspiration. I mean, that's sort of the reason I wrote the book with Explore Create. I'm a big believer that if you're going to write fantasy games, and if all you use as inspiration is fantasy games, then all you're going to do is do derivative work of the existing fantasy games. And that's true whether you're making games or you're making, paint, whatever it might be. It's anything, especially that's art. I think you owe it to yourself to take your inspiration, to gather your inspiration from as far afield as possible. And that's especially true right now in the modern age, even for engineering and other problem solving. A lot of future jobs, are going to come from people who are multidisciplinary and can kind of bring these things together. But, when I told you the story of the apparent tidal wave in Antarctica, and that literally created awe in me, at the same time, I also knew that, if I created a 3D game where I just made that polygonally, it wouldn't create the same sense of awe, right? Because everybody knows in a 3D game, you can just build whatever shape you want.
Right.
So unusual shapes are the norm. And it's only the fact that this seemed to defy the laws of physics is what made it so awesome. But what that does for me when I go see it is it makes me go like, wow, this gave me a sense of awe and wonder. Why? What buttons is it pushing that make me feel that way? And then as I'm working on games, I'm going like, okay, I really want to create this sense of awe, but what can I do? And so, for example, that's also why I differ with, again, I already mentioned I don't like study groups, focus groups. But, a lot of my contemporaries and a lot of games these days use procedurally generated maps. And there are certain places where procedurally generated work helps a lot, like to fill in the grass, to fill the forest with grass and trees and flowers and birds and things. That's great. Procedural stuff is essential. However, if you build your entire world, like, our natural world was created by, natural processes with, some reasonable amount of science behind it. Complex science, so we get places like Antarctica, but the majority of it looks familiar.
Right.
And so my problem with procedurally generated areas is most of it looks familiar. And the things that create awe are not the familiar. And so, I instead look to like if you think of the map for Peter Pan going to Neverland,
right?
You look down at the map, and it looks like a skull and crossbones on purpose. And you go to the cave, and the skull and crossbones things as metaphor is repeated, and the place where the mermaids are, has lots of waterfalls and things on purpose, And so the hand of design can speak to you. It's storytelling through the environment, and so I'm a big believer in storytelling through the environment. That you have to have the handcraft on top of or guiding that procedural activity, to make sure that you still come across the vista and look down into the bay and can see the mighty ships arrayed and the horrible jagged teeth